Wednesday, February 12th, 2025. Michael Cook speaking. It's currently 9:01 p.m. I'm making this audio log to talk about ideas. So, kind of alluded to this numerous times in other logs, but I wanted to talk about this upcoming map that I've been making, that I started making in Game Design Part 1. In a video that I made where I broke down the concepts of the Quake III Arena. I kind of need to touch it up so that it covers Quake Live as well, since all of the maps that I've been working on are for Quake Live. It's pretty simple to be able to get them to work for Quake III Arena also, but a lot less people that I know still playing Quake III Arena than Quake Live. Not to say that people don't do it still, but I don't know. It is a bit of a different game than the original, so there's minute differences between the two, and Quake Live seems to be a bit more optimized in my opinion. And anytime that I go to play Quake III Arena lately, I'm just accustomed to. It feels like the movement is sharper, more on point, and responsive. Not really sure what other adjective to use to describe that. Like, the new engine feels snappier. Right? So, one of the things that I started talking about was drawing like a layout of a map on graph paper. And though I guess the approach is very different from artist to artist, but I usually started out making maps with graph paper, and then I would use the graph paper to kind of figure out the dimensions of the map. And then once I would get some of the drawings into the editor, then I would realize that certain shapes that I drew on the graph paper wouldn't work out for, the level design. And so being able to translate what's on the graph paper to the mapping engine is a tall order, because you might start out with a pretty cool idea in your head, but once you start to apply some of those ideas or shapes, they need to be amended. And the best way to tell is when you're able to compile the map and then move around and then see how the map translates into the game. And I don't know, there really is a bit of a science involved in this. I don't think there's really a one-size-fits-all approach, which is what I mentioned in that video. But many of the maps that I've made so far, they're just remastered versions of the maps that I once made. Virtually all of them they have a base of the maps that I made for Quake III Arena many, many years ago. But I've made many changes to each of the maps to the point where they do seem to be a different map entirely in most cases, if not all. So this was the case when I originally got Quake Live and I started playing some of the maps that they tweaked or updated. And in many cases, the improvements made the game more enjoyable. And it's really what I've been spending a lot of time doing, is going through all my old ideas, making them better and extending them. But the map that I've been working on, that I drew on the graph paper after I made Game Design Part 1. Well, I started working on it a little more than a year ago, but I never finished it, and it just laid on the back burner for a while, so I didn't do anything with it. But the last few days, I open up this editor, and I'm trying to figure out what I want to do with the map. And I'll come up with an idea, and then I'll implement it. and then I load it up in the engine, and then I see how it turned out. So I have to have shaders and textures to be able to use in order for there to be a bit of a theme. And then once I have a theme going of geometry and shapes with the brushwork, then I start to come up with ways to provide extensions, or like in the case of 3D modeling or AutoCAD, you would start out with a shape, and then you would select the face of the shape, and then you would extrude it, and then you would add certain details to it, or change the ends. You would skew the ends or broaden them depending on what you were trying to do. And what I've been doing in the map editor isn't much different. I'll start out with like one of the walls that I've managed to throw together, and I'll create a bunch of brushwork that replicates the texture scheme, and then I'll use that as a template, and then I'll start to play around with the depth or the edges, try to see if I can implement some more depth into the map by adding certain geometry that overhangs other geometry, or create walls that aren't passable, things like that. And then once I know this is going to be the case at some point, I'm going to have the general shape of the map completed, and then I just have to start fine-tuning it. So today I got to the point where, well, yesterday and today, I got to the point where I added a lot of areas of the map that were unfinished, and I knew that I was going to eventually add those portions, but I didn't know how to shape them. And so in order to make a map that's going to be liked by people, you have to use a certain set of geometry and texturing techniques, and you have to make sure that the brushwork and the textures, that they complement each other. You don't want them to be, you want the geometry to be distracting to the point where it takes away from the texturing. Then also you want to add some lighting, and the best way to add lighting is with shaders. You can add light to a level through the sky textures, or you can use light textures, a light map, and this all plays into being able to understand the shader editor, or not necessarily the shader editor, but the shader syntax. So I have tried to talk about this before. A shader is basically when Photoshop has a PSD file open and there's a bunch of different layers that you're working with. The base layer might be the background, and it might just be the alpha channel. It might not have anything but just a transparent mask, right? And then you start to add in shapes with the shape tool. The shape tool will allow you to do things with that layer. If you want to mask out portions of the layer, then you do that with the second layer. Then you can add a third layer that crops out the outside of the mask, so that the inside and the outside of the mask are displayed. And then yeah, I mean, you can keep going with this, but the most complicated part about it is trying not to vectorize the image until you're ready to do so. Vectorization is basically, I can make a mathematical mask. Sorry, this truck's really loud. Never seen this truck here before. Vectorization is when you use something like Photoshop or Adobe Illustrator to make a shape that's not rasterized to the image, and then that will also be a layer. But I haven't quite figured out how to do stuff with Quake Live that uses vectorized elements. Right, so in order to save a file to memory, that the Quake 3 or Quake 5 engines can read, and it has alpha transparencies and stuff, you're going to want to save it to a target image file. And for most textures, you can get away with using a JPEG. But anytime that you're doing stuff with the alpha channel, you need to use a 32-bit target image. And yeah, there's plenty of utilities that allow you to do that. You can use GIMP or Photoshop. I use GIMP because that's free. Pretty useful tool. Very similar to Photoshop. But you have to have an idea of like what the textures are going to be or what they're going to do. And so you can take inspiration from maps that are already completed, and then you can kind of sample how their geometry works or their the gameplay in those maps work. And typically, though, this is the process. You start out with graph paper, like I do. You don't have to do what I do, but I'm just providing some sort of guidelines here, like a how-to guide. Then you draw it out with the graph paper. You use the graph paper to make a whole bunch of brushwork. And you have to be very considerate of vertical gameplay. So there might be floors above other floors. And that's what vertical gameplay is all about. There might be a ledge up above that you can climb a ladder to get to, and then you can oversee a certain area, but that'll make you more vulnerable to people with like a railgun or a rocket launcher or whatever. And so you want to keep those things in mind as you're developing the map. Like if you're in a certain circumstance, is there a certain strategy that would be advantageous? Well, pretty much positioning, any sort of positioning on a map is going to allow different strategies to be used. And I did talk about strategies in Game Design Part 1, but there's a lot of people out there that probably have a better handle on specific strategies that can be used. Really, if anything, strategies that I try to implement are that anybody could play the map. They don't have to be an expert, and they'll be able to play the game, run around, collect weapons, items, and have shootouts with one enemy or multiple enemies. And then there might be certain tricks that you can do to traverse the map more quickly, so you could rocket jump or grenade jump, or you could use the plasma climb thing, where you scale a wall with a plasma gun. You could do all sorts of stuff like this, and you have to be considerate of it when you're building the level. So all of that stuff kind of comes secondary to building all of the brushwork that you start out with. And then once you put something together, and then you're able to compile it, and you see how it looks and how it feels before you do anything serious or invest a hell of a lot of time. Right, the last few days I've been spending maybe 1 or 2 hours max a day, the last few days on this map, because what I've noticed is that when I work on something and then I leave it sitting around for a while, then I can take a look at it later on, and then I'll have more ideas of what to do. Whereas if I were sitting there forcing myself to do it, I'm not going to have time to mull over certain decisions. And so it's going to feel more forced and coerced rather than free and original. And so that's the idea. I've been working on this map. I do like an hour or two of work on it a day max, trying not to stress myself out working on it. But I know that at some point I'm going to be happy with the way things are in the level, and then I'm going to start spending like 8 hours a day working on it. Though I gotta say, I don't really like sitting there doing one thing for about 8 hours straight. Not anymore. I need a little bit of variety. I need some breaks. I take breaks from what I'm doing like most other people do, but working on these maps can be pretty stressful and it can be very not fun. And I don't like to work on stuff if it's not fun. However, at some point, the map is going to start to take off. The map that I'm working on, it'll start taking off and taking shape. Right? And my ideas and playing around with it, it'll sculpt it out even more, and then I'll start to come up with more ideas on what I can do. Like, you might like playing the guitar. It's a pretty good analogy here. You start out with a scale. The scale is basically a shape. You can use graph paper to do that, or you can use sheet paper, or you can use guitar tablature. Okay? And then once you know what chords you're going to play, if you're going to play something that's more classical than progressive, then you'll start with like an E chord, and you'll move on to like an A flat, an A chord, and then you'll do like a C sharp chord, and you go to a G chord. You know, these chords, they all have different sounds. So like a G major and a G minor are very different. And being able to shape the brushwork and work with lighting works in a similar manner, to where you can have like a major, like a C major type of brushwork, or you can have a C minor brushwork, and like, you know, the texturing to go with it as well as the lighting. So anytime that I'm making changes to these maps, I have to be considerate of all those things. And then I also have to be considerate of the bottom line. Is the map going to perform efficiently with a full load of people? So that is a pretty tall order. Hang on a second. So anyway, yeah, working on the maps lately. Kind of stressful because I'm giving myself an objective and I want to be done with it by, you know, I told myself that I'd be done like last month, but I haven't even finished a first alpha of the map that the 13th map that I want to include. So these 13 maps are, they're going to be, I have every expectation that a lot of people are going to wind up playing them, and there can't be any fucking mistakes. There can't be anything that I've overlooked. There can't be any glitches, any way for the players to get to certain positions that would seem more hackish, right? And that involves clipping. And generally, you don't do clipping on a level until the very end. You want to use, you want to build the level first, and then see if it's worth playing and if it's enjoyable. And if it is, then you start to add in the fine-tuning details and stuff, and tweaking a little aesthetic brushwork. So there's this map called Endurance. It's Q3GWDM2, Endurance. And when I was playing this map on my older laptop, I didn't really care for it because it is pretty complex and the frame rate drops dramatically in many places on that map. But now that I've got a newer laptop, I really do enjoy playing that level, but it is very, it's so detailed that it kind of throws off the gameplay a little bit. You want the map to be simple enough to where people can land shots against surfaces on walls. So like you basically, whenever you're making a map, you want to focus on how much damage you'll be able to do with the rocket launcher, and then you know, how many shots can you, what positions can you go to, or angles can you go to you know, take shots with the railgun, or areas where you're gonna spam with grenades to trap an opponent, or to cut them off from traversing from one portion of the level to the other. You know, choke points. A lot of these some of these concepts are in other games as well. Like choke points, there's a thing that's in StarCraft 2, League of Legends. You got a big army that you need to get through a certain bottleneck, and going through that bottleneck is quite dangerous for them to do. especially if you can use splash damage in that choke point. And a lot of players seem to like choke points, but also they like to have ledges where they can oversee a number of rooms in a given level and then have a shot to take. And then there's a bunch of other stuff. A bunch of other stuff that I didn't mention, or things that I plan on implementing into the level that I'm not quite at the stage to consider those aspects quite yet. And you know, there is a bit of a process to this. So the process is like I described. You start with graph paper, you translate it to the mapping editor, then you start applying textures and brushwork, geometry, and then you start to get a little creative with the geometry, and then you start to implement shaders and stuff to illuminate the map. Usually if you have good shaders, then it'll make any map look really good, you know, depending on how you use them. And so you know, like I was talking about, the shaders are sort of like having Photoshop open, and you have a bunch of different layers. And so the shader, it refers to these things called stages. And a stage can be something that modifies what's in the frame buffer, or it covers it, or it makes it transparent, or whatever, or illuminates it with a light map. And then you apply these things to the level as you're developing it, and then you start to come up with ideas on fine-tuning the details. Right? And then at some point, you're going to want to have to focus on like where are certain weapons going to go. Usually when you're drawing the map on the graph paper, you're going to have an idea of what weapons you want where, and you're going to focus on that. But that's not always the case. Sometimes, you know, you come up with this idea on graph paper that looks really cool from a top-down perspective, but you know, translating it to the mapping editor doesn't work out. So then, you know, your idea of where the weapons would go kind of falls out of favor, and then you know, then you're just left with this idea of experimenting. And so a lot of times what I'll do is I'll just, you know, throw weapons and items and health and armor and power-ups in specific places, and I'll like add a bunch of details in the map around those items, which is a pretty good way to do it. But you can also add the items as an afterthought. Sometimes that approach works pretty well. You don't have to go back and forth between all these strategies. And then, you know, I think the days where I'm working on a map and I'm switching between GIMP and PowerShell and GTK Radiant and Quake Live, and then back and forth between them all, those are the days where I'm working 8 hours a day because I want to, not necessarily because I'm forcing myself to. Right? At some point, these maps, they take shape, and then when I'm testing it out, I'll know, okay, this is ready for like a new release or video or whatever. And then so I'll make a video featuring some of the things that I changed. And yeah, while I'm doing all of this, I spend a fair amount of time going back and forth between the game and the editor. I go back into the game when you know, I get a little frustrated or just don't really want to work on the map, and then I get some time in on the game, and then I stop. You know, sometimes I'll be playing and I'll record a demo. You know, especially when the server loads up one of the maps that I made. And so that's what I've been doing the last few days, just making a few videos showing me playing the maps on a server against humans, since most of the videos just focus on playing the boss for development purposes. And yeah, I don't know, it'd be pretty cool to have like someone that would help me beta test the maps without like publishing them to a server where people are going to download an unfinished version of the map and then be stuck. And then once they have an older version of the map, they need to subscribe to the map and then run a certain script that'll update the map on disk, and then they'll be able to play it. That is a bit of a nightmare, and that's why many of the maps that are already on servers I haven't finished, because the administrator decided to put on a not finished version of the map. And so if that's the case, I don't want to take away like any sense of practicality that those maps offer. You know, there's always, like, even in like any business or company, they have research and development, or development and production. Right? So like those maps have reached production level for those servers, although they're not the final product. And some companies, they'll release a product and then they'll continue to work on it and make upgrades to it. You know, the Falcon 9 by SpaceX is a pretty good example. Right? They worked on the Falcon 9, they got that to be really successful. It's able to take smaller payloads into orbit rapidly, and then the rockets are reusable. Pretty good concept to lay down the groundwork for Starship, which is a much larger version of the Falcon 9. And SpaceX will occasionally test the newer version of their rockets. I think they just did the 7th flight test, and the booster landed, but the rocket itself exploded. It was the first stage 2 rocket, or not stage 2. Stage 2. So stage 1 was how they originally built the Starship, and they were constantly tweaking stuff. And then after they got enough testing in, then they decided to compartmentalize the component making process. You know, using a 3D printer to print the engine. I think that's what they're using, like not exactly a 3D printer, but something that is shaping the parts of the engine, the new Raptor engine, the Raptor V3 engine. They're able to take advantage of very sophisticated design cues. And then there's a picture out there that I think I've shared it before. There's the Raptor version 1, which has a bunch of shit sticking out of it, and they have the Raptor version 2, which has a hell of a lot less shit sticking out of it, and then they have the Raptor version 3, which has basically nothing sticking out of it. It is sort of like comparing old school F-150 to a new school what the hell, I don't know, like a Lamborghini or something, like a brand new Lamborghini, or what's that one road, what's that one car that has the land speed world record, the Hennessy, or the Agera RS or something. 270 something miles per hour. Not sure if that's still the fastest car in the world, but it's like comparing an old school 1970s F-150 to that, the Agera RS. It's what it looks like anyway. And being able to work on these maps sort of relies on the same concept. I'm going to have versions that people are going to play, and then I'm going to have versions that I'm going to continue to develop until they're done. And then when they're done, that's going to be pretty fun when they're done, because then people will be able to check them out, provide input. Sorry, I was distracted. There's some car passing by. Anyway, this kind of applies to my programming work as well. Like, I would have an idea of something I would want to work on, or even a document, and I would lay down like my initial ideas, and I would whittle them down until they took shape and they had more more of a structure to them. Like when I am programming stuff, I want my programming to look good and function well, and a lot of people, they don't do that. Like looking at some of Jeffrey Snover's old scripts, and any dude who works at Microsoft, a lot of their old scripts is just kind of like glued together. Like there's barely any spacing. There's no line breaks to separate like one portion of a code from another, and then there's a bunch of methods being called and relying on objects that are already made within the PowerShell or .NET CLR framework. And then there's a lot of assemblies that the PowerShell editor can access. And with those assemblies, they can reach into every component of the operating system. And then you can interact with every component of the operating system using something like PowerShell. And you can even do stuff with like interacting with a web server with the REST API. And then you can interact with XAML, or you could even interact with .NET and ASP.NET and stuff like that. You can have a bunch of stuff in your programming, and in a lot of cases programming looks obfuscated. So at any time that you're working with an assembly, if you want to know what the hell the assembly is doing, you're going to need a program like Ghidra, or something that will look at the hex values of whatever code is there. Right, and then something like Ghidra will take a DLL and it'll actually procedurally go through all of the functions within the assembly, and then come up with a name for it all, for each of those entries, and then it'll make it like human readable. You can see a lot of videos of John Hammond doing stuff like this on YouTube, right? And the thing is being able to compact everything into an assembly. I really doubt that they care how the code looks. They really only care about how it works. And I guess maybe I'm wrong about that, but half the battle in programming stuff is knowing what to name stuff. And half of the problems you'll face when making maps or editing graphics is knowing what to shape, how to shape stuff, how to combine shapes, how to take shapes or functions to calculate against other shapes or functions, and how to come out with a result that looks good, or the output is good, or it sounds good, or all of the above. And you know, in the case of making maps, then you have to know how it feels, right? Like, everybody knows how it feels to run a program when it takes too long. Why isn't this program loading up? Why isn't this website loading up? Why, you know, streaming, video streaming. Anytime someone is streaming videos and then it says that it's buffering or whatever, well, it's causing a bit of a complication from rendering that video. Something's being caught in the middle of a transmission and being stopped. And once the transmission resumes, then it'll pick up where it left off and continue. So a lot of these concepts do apply to mapping, though like not in a specific way, more of like a general way. Being able to write music relies on like bass music theory. You don't really need to understand music theory, but you do need to understand how to make music that sounds good. Because if you're a musician and you're making music that doesn't sound good, then people aren't going to want to listen to it. And the same thing can be said about like a map for Quake or any other game, or a model, or any program. If the program doesn't look like it's any good, who the hell's going to use it? Or if it doesn't work all that well, it takes a really long time for stuff to work. It's not very efficient. It's broken. And the job of being a programmer, or an artist or an engineer, is to develop all the individual parts that work together, which make something work. And failure to do that in any, you might be able to build a bunch of components for a map or a program or a document or graphics, but if there's something that's in any of that work that looks stupid or wrong, it's going to derail your progress. It's going to cause people to not want to use it or play it or see it or hear it. And so trying to say like how to come up with an idea and then like finish it is pretty tall order, because I guess I'm kind of like teaching myself as I go again, or reviewing as I go. But here are some key concepts. Right now I'm just kind of like adding a whole bunch of curves and stuff to the level, and adding curves takes a lot of patience because sometimes the curves don't meet up at the seams, and so you have to come up with a really rough idea first, and then once you have the rough idea of the level, and I'm not talking about like the initial steps, I'm talking about once you have like the base of the level that you're going to start to whittle down, and then you start to add details and stuff. Right? Like you don't want to start adding details to a map early on before you even have the layout completed. You start with the layout. Right? You want to make it somewhat convincing. You don't want it to, I guess any approach works. If you want to come up with a bunch of brushwork and not texture them at all, you could do that, but the textures help guide the eye on what details to add, or what shapes or angles to add or remove or subtract. A lot of map editing relies around subtraction of space rather than to add a bunch of brushes. So there's a concept I kind of want to talk about where if you look at an image, or like it'll be like an illusion. You look at one person will see like an old woman, and another person will see like a couple of rabbits on a tree, and both of those things were drawn into the image. There's a word for how that occurs with language, words and stuff. But then there's also a way that you can do that with positive and negative space. So you could use a black color to be the font for some phrase, and then you could use the white space to be like the same font, but blends in with the black. Right? And that's how you want to develop a map. You want to be considerate of the playable space and the non-playable space, and how it all blends together. Probably should continue to write up a document and talk about all this stuff rather than to make an audio log talking about all this stuff off the top of my head. But I think it's good exercise for me to do that mentally, being able to talk about a number of ideas that have been in my mind recently that I wanted to express and build upon. And at some point, I'll be able to demonstrate this new map that I'm working on. But all the things that I talked about in this audio log are in the back of my mind every single time that I'm working on something that I want it to. I don't want it to be a total waste of time. Right? And if I force myself to do something over and over, or for extended periods of time, and I'm not enjoying what I'm doing, then I might as well like consider it a total waste of time, because I will likely make a mistake that will cause people to not want to play the map. You know, any single flaw in a given map could make or break the map. You know, any flaw in a song could make or break the song. You know, all these things are pretty important, and pacing is really important. You know, as many times as I've said, patience is a virtue. I really, like, I could say it 1,000 times, but people will just like say, well, whatever, that's fucking stupid. Patience, schmatience, right? Some people, like, they won't say it out loud, but that is what some people think. They want something to be done now, instant gratification, now. I want to hit it and then it's done. I want to be able to play it and it has no problems and it's fun. There's a tall order, like, to make something that's enjoyable and well built and plays well and is efficient and won't run slow and is visually appealing and is memorable and causes people to feel like playing it is actually fun. You really got to play around with a bunch of ideas. And so, like, the last few days I've been kind of slowly adding shapes to the level, right? And then last night I thought to add this big ass curve area, and I layered the curves, and then with each layer there's going to be like a overhead ledge or whatever, and these overhead ledges add a bit of depth to that area, but I think the curve is too big, and so I made a judgment call today. I was going to start resizing the curves that I had already made, and then I said to myself, well, I might come to regret that decision, so I'm going to hold off on that, and I'm going to continue building it as if I didn't do that and see how that looks, right? And then tomorrow, I'm pretty sure I'm going to wind up making all those curves a bit smaller, and then adjusting all of the brushwork around those curves so that it blends in, and then see how it looks at that point. And in the back of my mind, a lot of the decisions that I make when I'm mapping, they revolve around weighing those types of decisions, and that is what takes the most time. Coming up with the brushwork is the easy part. Coming up with the idea that allows me to shape the brushwork the way I want it to be shaped, that is the hardest part. And that's why a lot of designers will use art and the storyboards, and they'll look at a storyboard or an idea or a piece of graph paper that they drew something on, and they'll try to stick to it, or they might even go so far as to scan it into the computer and then make a picture out of it, and then animate, like, get it to a point where that picture is a 3D model. And then you get the texture artist that comes up with the skin for the model. It might be the same person, but it doesn't necessarily need to be. It could be someone totally different. And I would say usually a modeler will probably come up with a model and then implement like a base texture that wraps around the whole model. And then eventually, like, an actual someone who spends a lot of time focusing on models will go through and make it more high resolution or add more detail and make it cool looking. And this map, Q3G WDM2 Endurance, I can tell that the guy whoever made that map is a modeler. Like I said, there's a lot of things about that map are rather complex. And I was looking at this rock in one portion of the map, and I was thinking to myself, there's no way that this dude used 3-point clipping to be able to make this brush. No fucking way in hell. So, being able to make good models can be done one way or another. One way is you could draw it out. Another way is you could actually take the measurements of an actual rock and then use like a point cloud or something like that to get the models to build the model in the engine, and then you can use a camera at a bunch of different angles to be able to apply the textures. But anytime you're taking like a 3D object and turning it into a 2D image, you're going to get some flatness one way or another. The brushwork is meant to help make it seem a lot less flat, but it'll still be flat in some cases. So looking at a lot of this fine brushwork in this map, endurance, it reminds me of like Quake 4 or Doom 3 quite a lot. It's just like walls with vents, and like there's ductwork there. So obviously the guy who made the map, it might be the guy who made the map may have also made all the models and the textures and stuff, but that would take a really long time to make that map and to focus on all of those details, which is why I think that there were multiple people that worked on that map. I think there's even a possibility that that map was made for a different game and then it was just ported into Quake III Arena, but I could be wrong about that. Yeah, there's a lot of polygons in that level. There's a lot of curves, a lot of advanced usage of curves. There's a lot of trim surfaces, there's a lot of angles. There's a lot of places where your weapons don't actually go. You can go to shoot a rocket at somebody expecting the rocket to hit a wall behind them, but it actually goes into the details of the map. That's not exactly a fun situation, especially in Quake III Arena or Quake Live. Like that sort of serves as a distraction, whereas you can still have all those details, but then you just put up like a weapon clip, and then the rockets will explode on those weapon clips. You'll still be able to see through the weapon clip, but a weapon clip brush is basically as structurally sound as an actual brush. Although, if you try to use it as a structural brush and it is between an entity inside of the level and the void, you'll get a map leak error. So you can use weapon clips for a lot of stuff, but I would say that a better idea is to use the geometry of the map to your advantage. You want to implement some details, but you don't want to make it so detailed that it looks super real. You gotta like keep in consideration that it's an arena shooter the whole time, and that the more detailed that you make a map, you could continue to make a map more and more and more detailed, like this dude did for the map endurance. But a lot of times that will serve to contradict the principle of the map itself. Like there's certain portions of that level that would make it more fun if it were just more simple. Simplicity is the ultimate form of sophistication. I think whoever made that was trying to make a point about how they could come up with a really cool design and stuff, and then it'd play well. So really a great example of a map that hits 10 out of 10 in so many different categories. But like I said, trying to make something like that is going to take a really long time. Whoever made that map probably spent a while in between each single time that he opened up the editor to add certain details or models, and working on a model until it's done. Let's assume that it is the same guy, that he made the textures and the models and the map, which I find doubtful, but it's possible that it was one person that did all of that. Well, how many of those maps would they be able to make in a year or 2 years? And how long did it take to make that one particular map? Well, I can say just by looking at it, it took at least 3 months. No way that like whoever made that map could sit there with a straight face and tell me they didn't work on it for 3 months. At least 3 months. Because all those details kind of blend in so well that there's no way that you could rush that. And that's what a lot of people don't understand. Like, you can make something and rush it and then it'll be done. But then, like, if you have additional ideas, which anyone who chooses to make a map, or as an artist will do without being asked to do it. They'll just think to do it in their heads, because you know, when it's in their headspace, they'll continue to think about ways to change it or manipulate it. Well, if you rush all this shit, then you're kind of at a loss, because then whatever final result that you're making is there's not gonna be anything significant and or different in a significant way about it to make it stand out from other maps, to want to get people to want to play it some more. So I know that I'm probably coming off as if I'm talking in circles and whatever, and that's possible because, you know, I didn't rehearse this, so just kind of talking off the top of my head, and I wanted to make sure that I covered certain points that I have been thinking about the last few days, and then this will help me shape and sculpt the video game design part 2, which I intend to make after I release this map pack. I'm going to use every single map that I've worked on in that video, and people are going to see it before and after difference of each map, and then yeah, I'm pretty sure it'll be entertaining and educational, as well as able to be interacted with, which yeah, I don't know of any other mapper or design artists out there that documented the entire project they were working on and made videos, content for people to see as it was being developed. And then I'm sure some people did have beta testers along the way, but yeah, I don't know. I think the key aspect that makes this much more of a challenge is the fact that I've been documenting and making videos of, you know, each of these maps, each version of the map. And at any time that I have an idea in one map that I think about when making another, I'll load up that map and I'll copy certain elements of that map, whether it's brushwork or textures or shaders or curves or models or sounds or the triggers. You know, all those things will be on my mind as I'm developing each individual instance. And a lot of times I'll have like a version of the map where I watch it on video later on and I'm not happy with the way it looks in a certain area. Like right now, the one map that I feel like that the most is Wisdom. Right now, Wisdom, it's got a lot going on in it, but for some reason it doesn't have the striking visual appearance that I want it to have. And same thing with Breakthrough. I think it's because of the textures that I modified with GIMP to be able to make those maps. A lot of the maps that I made that are Gothic styled and have like a hue or saturation filter applied to an existing game asset texture, those are the maps that I'm seeing like disparities, you know, between what I like it to look like and you know, how it looks like now. But yeah, that's a topic for another conversation. I think that's going to do it for this particular audio log, analog